It's another episode of the Ranting Ron Show. It's the Ranting Cast. Well, I'm Frank Curry. Brennan Klak is with me again. We had him on about a month ago, talking about the draft, talking about some other hockey stuff. Now we're a couple weeks into after free agency started, and we still got some unsigned guys. Like obviously the big fish is Nazem Kadri, John Klingberg, PK Subban, Phil Kessel are all guys that haven't signed a contract yet with an NHL team because it looks like teams are trying to move out money so that they can sign these guys, and it's becoming really tough to do. And we had a big trade over the weekend with Matthew Tkachuk going to Florida. Brendan, how you doing? And what have you make so far of free agency?
I'm doing great. I've decided to shake it up, and I've got the globe and a giant parrot behind me. So
I like it.
clearly, I'm trying to give a vacational vibe to this. That I'm a tropical person or something. Uh, as for moving around, and speaking of vacations, when you go on a vacation, you go on a plane, you go somewhere else. Maybe you go to Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, it was Matt Tkachuk. But I mean, free agency, a lot of different players changing locations and going on planes to somewhere else. I mean, it's been a really, really, to me, not a wild and crazy biggest offseason of all time, but there's been a lot of movement. Like, as a fan, it's very exciting to see that not just day one was exciting, but also we're still sitting here with a guy like Nazem Kadri available, which to me
Mm-hmm.
is very surprising, especially after the playoffs he had. And like you said, like, teams are trying to move out money. In Nazem Kadri's case, I guess I'll just get right into it. Um, I'm really wondering if the Colorado Avalanche are trying to move out money themselves here, and that's the holdup. Nazem Kadri loved
Yeah.
Colorado. They still have a two center slot that they need to fill. And I'm not sure if Alex Newhook can fill the second line center spot yet. I'm not sure they want Rantanen playing second line C all the time. So I do wonder if something is cooking there in terms of the Avalanche still trying to move money out.
Colorado right now, I'm looking at the cap friendly. With when you include Alex Newhook, they have 11 forwards on there. Obviously, they can have they got a couple of other guys like they signed. Like remember, they signed Ben Myers towards the end of the season, a college guy. They still have Martin Cowd as a prospect. So you wonder maybe if one or two of if both of those guys maybe make the roster next season, but you never know. And you never know if they maybe make any other low key signings as well. But yeah, I really think it's Kadri going back to Colorado is likely the scenario that happens, and it's just once Colorado moves out enough money to be able to do it. You have to wonder though what's the money they're moving out. And my first guess is Eric Johnson. 1 year left, $6 million, but he has a no trade / no movement clause. He has 19 teams he can be traded to. So you have to wonder if any of those 19 teams are even interested in trading for Eric Johnson. And does Eric Johnson, and I don't even think Eric Johnson wants to be traded at anyway. I mean, he's essentially a lifer there. He got traded there, got 2 or 3 years into his career after being a number one overall pick.
I remember Eric Johnson getting traded. It was very early in my Twitter career per se,
Yeah, it
and it was
must
a
have been
midnight trade. He got
yeah,
traded at midnight Eastern time, and it was the Eric Johnson Kevin Shattenkirk trade that had Chris Stewart in it as well.
yeah,
Uh, I think Colorado's probably going to move JT Compher. I think that's the name that I would wonder about. I only say that because JT Compher is a centerman. They
mm-hmm.
can have a guy like Newhook at 3C, and Ben Myers, who they just signed, is also a centerman. So I kind of
Yeah,
look at it like, well, if you sign Kadri back and you had JT Compher playing that role in the third line, then they kind of could move him up and whatnot. He might be the money that has to go. But I also wonder if they don't get Nazem Kadri re-signed, if he goes somewhere else. And there are still teams that have a lot of money that could go for Nazem Kadri. And I do wonder if the New York Islanders are also trying to make a push on Nazem Kadri, because things have been kind of quiet. And when things are quiet, it means that Lou Lamoriello is in on it.
he's typically
I
up to something. Yeah.
usually up to something. I imagine that Colorado could also look at the market in trade and see if they can get a second line center for a guy like Sam Girard. I mean, Sam Girard's a really good defenseman. He's a top four defenseman. He's
Mm-hmm.
small, shifty, but they just won the cup without him. And they do have Bowen Byram
Yep.
and Cale Makar, Devin Tays. They already have a lot of guys on the blue line that can do
Manson's
a
back
Gerard
as
role.
well.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, like Elliot Friedman had reported before the free agency day that one of the teams that were in on Brett Kulak before the Oilers re-signed him was Colorado. That should ring an alarm bell to people because Brett Kulak's a left shot D,
Yep.
and he ended up getting $2.75 million. The Avs already have a bunch of left shot D. Why would they want Kulak? Maybe there's some options on the
They're
table.
probably looking at trading Gerard at that point. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Islanders as an option, I think makes a ton of sense for them because they need more scoring. And if you can sell the idea of potentially Barzal and Kadri as your 1-2 centers down the middle. But if they go out and get Kadri, they're gonna have to trade either Brock Nelson or JG Pajot because they're going to need the money. They're also going to need the money to re-sign Alex Romanov, who they just traded for at the draft because he's still a RFA, and Noah Dobson, who's also an RFA right now. And they only have 4 defensemen really under contract, so they got to get those 2 guys signed as well. And they have just over $11 million in cap space right now. So that's why I think like the Kadri makes sense. But then if they do that, they're going to have to ship money out so that they can sign their 2 defensemen who are both 22 years old and guys you're gonna want there for a while. So it makes sense, but if they're not able to do that, I don't really see how the Islanders can do it.
I mean, all the word coming in the deadline was, oh, they're going to move Semyon Varlamov, but it really sounds like they'd like to keep Semyon Varlamov, and that Ilya Sorokin likes having Semyon Varlamov with him as a tandem.
Russian connection does help.
It does sound like that's less likely, whereas maybe a guy like Josh Bailey could move. But at the same time, if you look around the NHL right now, and this is the tough part the Islanders will have, that Colorado will have, any team that wants to make additions will have this problem right now. The premium for moving out money is crazy. I mean, Oliver Bjorkstrand going for a 3rd and a 4th round pick is ridiculous. It's worse than the Pavel Buchnevich
trade for Seattle.
Amazing trade for Seattle to leverage their cap space into doing that. But that tells you anyone lesser than Oliver Bjorkstrand right now, what's their value? Like if you're a guy earning $3 million and you score 30 points a year, your value is what, a 7th? Like it's going to be something ridiculous. You might have to add, like, look at the premium the Rangers paid to get rid of Patrick Nemeth. Now Patrick Nemeth is cheaper than Zach Kassian was and cheaper than Peter Mrazek was, but because time had passed from the draft and more teams had spent money, 2 2nd-round picks to get rid of a guy that's under $3 million. So yeah, these
potentially 2 2nd-round picks. Yeah, looking at that trade. And they got a 3rd and a 2nd to take Kassian and just move down 3 spots in the draft. So yeah, I mean you're in that, and Cassian's just over $3 million. And you're seeing a ton of value, a ton of decently high draft picks that you gotta get rid of just to get rid of a contract. And for a guy like Josh Bailey, I mean, I thought of him as well, but the problem is I don't think there'd be as much interest in Josh Bailey as there would be like a Brock Nelson or a JG Pajot, just because I don't like Josh Bailey. I'm not a fan of at 5-on-5. He's really just a bona fide power play specialist at this point in his career. I don't know how many teams are going to want a guy like that. I think if the Islanders want to lessen the potentially the value they would have to trade, they could probably do that by moving like a Nelson out, just because teams are going to value those players a lot more.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, the thing with Josh Bailey, at least, is that his playoff production is really good. His playoff history, he shows up. But at the same time, I mean, Brock Nelson is a guy that can score you 30 goals. And that's why I don't think the Islanders would want to trade Brock Nelson at all. I think they'd rather probably move him to wing so he could play wing with Barzal or Kadri, because they're going to have a lot of centers at that point with the log jam if they get Kadri.
Yeah, that's why it might, if they want to keep Nelson, they may have to trade Pajot then at that point too, just for the same reason.
It's very possible. And also, if you look at the Islanders, I mean, it's very interesting how we have heard rumors about Matt Barzal a little bit kind of trickling through the last 2 or 3 years. And now that this Huberdeau for Tkachuk trade has happened, and we'll get into that a lot.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
but it's very possible that that might be a nice flag for the rest of the league. Hey, if you want to shake up your team, you can.
There's a way to
And
do
the
it.
Islanders, Barzal's never been a fit for them because he's a crafty, creative forward, and
Mhm.
they've always been very system driven. So I don't know what Lane Lambert's going to be like playing for, but he's very similar to Barry Trotz. I mean, they've been
Yep.
together as coaches for a long, long time. Will Barzal be an Islander for very much longer? I've always wondered that. I don't think he's a lifer there. At some point, I think that relationship will come to an end. I just don't know if it's going to be in 6 years or now.
Mhm.
And I don't know. We just saw the biggest blockbuster ever, and money's tight. We could see some more interesting deals like that coming forward.
Yeah. So what about other guys too? Like we mentioned Kadri, like John Klingberg's still out there. PK Subban's still out there. He was a guy that a lot of Sabre fans thought that they would target because of the Malcolm Subban brotherhood. And also Phil Kessel's still a free agent too. What do you make of those guys?
I think John Klingberg might have overplayed his hand. And I guess we're going to find out what happens in free agency with whatever contract he gets. But the market for John Klingberg looked to be Seattle, Carolina. Those are the two teams that seemed to be the most interested for Klingberg.
Mhm.
Seattle then went and they got a cheaper deal with Justin Schultz, who's
Yep.
not as good as Klingberg, but plays a similar role for a team like them.
Yep.
And then you look at Carolina and they trade for Brent Burns and
Mhm.
they didn't give up anything really. It was a third
Not
round
much.
pick
Yeah.
and some stuff, like Steven Lorentz is
Even
an all right
Lorenz,
bottom
the
sixer.
bottom sixer. Yeah.
McEnemy is a goalie in their system. They didn't
Yeah.
seem to be too high on. So like
And
they didn't.
I was gonna say too, they got San Jose to retain salary. So like Brett Burns is their second highest paid defenseman right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Brent Burns at 5-on-5 is on the decline, but the guy
Mhm.
can still be a great penalty killer, and he's stepping into Carolina where they have the best penalty kill in the league a lot of the time, and he's going to play with Slavin. So
Probably. Well, it depends on how they want to manage his minutes. But I think the one thing too that really makes him, I think, a better fit in Carolina than John Klingberg would be. What's one of the things that Brett Burns has always been known for? Getting shots through for a guy like Joe Pavelski when Pavelski was there for the longest time. Carolina loves their defenseman shooting. Brent Burns would fits perfectly with that, with getting shots through and having guys like Teravainen, maybe Teravainen in front, maybe or Aho as well, and Jordan Stahl especially. And if they do bring back Nietzsche as well, and now Pacioretty's there, so I think like that right there, just just the style that Burns plays, kind of makes him a better fit.
well, and he's also pretty good at denying zone entries. So with
Yeah.
Slavin also good at that, it's going to be really hard to get chances against that pairing. So I think it's a good fit. Now, of course, they could switch things around. They could put Pesci with Slavin again.
Yep.
We've seen that plenty of times. But the point is, Carolina got their guy, and then
Yeah.
Seattle got their guy. And then we heard some rumors that the Dallas Stars were re-engaging with John Klingberg. Well, what? Because the word on the street was that there was no way that was going to be a reunion. So something tells me that Klingberg overplayed the market, and now what is that contract going to look like? Well, it might be shorter term than he wanted. We might see a 1-year deal for
Yeah.
Klingberg. We might see a 2-year deal for Klingberg, and it's possible he still gets some big money out of it. But will he get that 8-year deal? No, he won't, because that's already passed. But will he get that 7-year deal?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it right now, and especially if you look at cap friendly, there's only a few teams left that even have money over 10 million where they don't have an RFA to sign or something. So I really don't see Klingberg getting more than 5 at this point, maybe 6 if it's a 1-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be tough. Now, as far as the other two go, I've heard not a lot on PK Subban. There's going to be a few teams, though, that are trying to get him in that Jason Spezza like range where it's minimum to $1 million. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be something cheaper. Now, I'm sure PK Subban wants more than that, but at the same time, his play has declined. I thought he had a better year this year than the year before.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that, I still wonder, Toronto was the rumored fit for him, but how do they fit him in now? I don't see it.
Really
They
can't.
added they can't with cap, and they added Victor Mete and Jordy Ben, and they have
Yep.
names. Buffalo's an interesting one because he's an older guy, and it's like, okay, well, you can play with your brother, but also he's a guy that might be looking for more of a contender at this point.
And not
So,
anymore now since the Sabres signed Lybushkin.
Well, that's the thing. So like Buffalo actually does have D depth that they can play with, and they don't need like no one really needs PK Subban, I think, in the NHL. A team that I thought was interesting was Edmonton for a little bit, because if they had
Mhm.
moved Tyson Barrie and moved his
Yeah.
money out, PK Subban is essentially a guy that can play Tyson Barrie's role in a more minimal capacity and would only cost what, a million five compared to the 4.5 that Barrie has. But now moving out Barry's gonna be really hard because of this premium on money moving out. So I don't know where Subban's going to go, but I think at this point he might take less if it's a contending team. Phil Kessel's the last one you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So my theory on Phil Kessel, this is one that I think I've seen bounced around on Twitter, and I agree with somewhat from just what I've heard. There are teams that are concerned about signing Phil Kessel because they want him on a cheaper deal
Mm-hmm.
where, okay, well, if we have to scratch Phil Kessel for a game or two, we can, but he's on that game streak. And last year, when the Flyers
Mm-hmm.
scratched Keith Yandel, there was a lot of uproar around Philadelphia and the NHL. How can you scratch Keith Yandel? Keith Yandel was not having a good season last year. He deserved to be
No.
scratched. But because he's on the streak, bad PR all around,
Mm-hmm.
that makes things tougher for a team that's good to sign Kessel, knowing I don't know if we can take him out of the lineup without getting all this backlash and bad PR. So it's going to be interesting to see where he goes, because he's also a weird player now. Like, he had over 50 points, but he had 8
Yeah.
goals.
Yeah, I was gonna say he scored less than 10 goals.
So what is he? Is he a sniper? But is he a good 5-on-5 player? Not really.
Eh.
So is your power play struggling? Then that's a guy that you can maybe consider bringing in. I wonder about Minnesota, but they have almost no cap.
Yep.
But that's a team that their power play was not good last year, and they could have some issues again. So they might
Well,
need some help there. Fiala moved on, right?
on a
So
cheap contract, I think Minnesota could work because I'm looking at the cap friendly right now. They have a little over 4 million. But I guess, yeah, they don't really have any major RFAs to sign as well. So Minnesota could work. I mean, but I think your theory on the game streak kind of makes it a lot more difficult for teams, especially if like he's just not performing and then you get that PR. So I wonder about Chicago, since look at what they've been doing. They're blowing it up massively, trading DeBrincat to Ottawa, trading Kirby Doc to Montreal. There's rumors about Kane as well. So, and they didn't even qualify Kubalik and Strome, and now those two guys are on new teams. So Chicago, yes, we see the writing on the wall and what they're doing. At the same time, they're gonna need at least a couple more NHL players just to fill out a lineup. So I wonder if any one of the three that we were talking about earlier, and Kessel, even Klingberg and Subban, would take like a 1-year deal on and play on Chicago and try to play their way to get traded at the deadline.
well, and that's why I'm kind of surprised Chicago didn't qualify Dylan Strome or Dominic Kubalik, because it appeared that on free agency day, their plan was, we're going to sign Andreas Athanasiou. We're going to sign Max Domi. We're going to sign guys that in that second shelf of free
Mm-hmm.
agents, and we're going to give them 1-year deals so we can just trade them at the deadline. That clearly to me was the plan. So I guess maybe as a favor to Kubalik and Strome, because they're younger guys, and they thought, well, you know,
They're not a
we'll be
part
able
of
to
our
grab guys
future.
anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very possible that's something that a guy like Phil Kessel could look at and say, hey, I'm going to play in Chicago on the top power play,
Yeah.
and I'm going to have time to inflate my points, and then I'll get traded to a real contender at that point. And yeah,
Yep.
Chicago will have no incentive to scratch Phil Kessel, because
That's exactly it.
he'll be in their top 6.
Yeah.
So
And
he'll
like
be
they got to play NHL players at this point too. So why not get a guy who has this game streak that you could just let him continue, and even if he's not performing, I mean that's you kind of want that at anyway if you're Chicago. And then yeah, you could just trade him at the deadline as well. You could trade him to a contender and just get more draft picks out of it. I mean, I think for Chicago this is a win-win in a way, and I'm kind of surprised that they haven't jumped on it.
Well, and before we move to the trade and evaluating
Yeah.
that and whatnot, I
Yep.
mean there's one team within all of this that makes me really, really puzzled, because we just talked about Kadri and Klingberg, and there's still a few RFAs out there. I guess, I don't like to be the guy that anticipates an offer sheet, but I like to
Mhm.
sometimes stir it up a little. I'll go on Twitter and I'll be like, these are the offer sheet eligible guys, instead of saying these are the RFAs.
Mhm.
Noah Dobson and Jake Ottinger and Jason Robertson and Rasmus Sandin, Capo Caco. Like, there's some guys that I can see actually getting some offer sheets. And the one team where if you go on Cap Friendly, you're just confused to look at, it's the Anaheim Ducks.
Yep.
Because the Anaheim Ducks aren't necessarily a terrible team. We're talking about a team that was in the playoffs pretty much up until end of January, and then they tailed off. But Trevor Zegras is only going to get better.
Yep.
Their blue line, Jamie Drysdale, is only going to get better. Like,
Mhm.
they have a lot of young talent that's not that bad, and they also have 3 second-round picks coming in 2023 that they could
Yep.
try to trade around. And I'm looking at this roster and I'm going, like, you're 4 million under the floor.
Yep.
You're not even like 10 million out. You're 25.8 million away from the cap. Well, and that's with signing Vetrano, and that's with signing Ryan Strome. So what is Anaheim's plan? This is really curious to me, because they just signed Lundestrom. He's their last RFA, 1.8 million a year. Didn't even get them close, really. They're still 4
No.
million or so out. They have to do something. And they were rumored to be looking at moving John Gibson. What are they planning? And I truly wonder if maybe the Anaheim Ducks are the team that goes, well, maybe we'll do the offer sheet. But are they in a position to do that? They're not a contender, but they're also maybe not a lottery team. So, they're the team that I'm curious about. Are they going to do anything with Kadri or Klingberg, or take
Subban or
advantage of this
Ketzel.
offer sheet
Yeah.
situation, or take advantage of the teams needing cap space, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're an interesting team for that. I was thinking them as well while you were talking earlier. And then you also had, I mean, even then, Arizona is still 1.5 million under the floor as well. So they gotta get more money in some way too. Just so for the same reason. I mean, I could see a scenario where they bring back, Kessel, or they sign a Klingberg or a Subban to a 1 year deal, is if they really wanted to. Just for the same reason we talk about with Chicago. I can see that. But I guess with Arizona too, like they still have to sign
They feel
Lawson Krause and Barrett Hayden.
Barrett Hayden is one that
Yeah.
might get traded, actually, but
Yeah.
Lawson Gross for sure, right?
So maybe that's it for them. They overpay a little bit on Krause on a short term, and that gets them to the floor at that point. But at the same time, I mean, if I'm these teams who need to spend money, I mean, I mean, unless you're trying to contend. So like if you're like the Islanders, or if you're even, I mean, I think Dallas thinks that they can contend as well. Like Dallas has the fourth most cap space right now, and they could make this kind of a move still if they really wanted to. But yeah, I mean, like Chicago should be pouncing on this, and I think Anaheim should be pouncing on this too, unless they do decide to go the offer sheet way, which is still a possibility, because like I looking at like the RFAs right now, and I'm thinking, yeah, you mentioned Kako, Ottinger, Dobson, Sandin. I'm also thinking Marty Nietzsche as well. I'm also thinking even like Ethan Bear possibly, and even Jesper Bratt.
And Kirby Doc,
Yeah,
Montreal
bring
is
Kirby Doc too. Yeah.
200,000 away from the cap themselves. But I think, to me, the most tantalizing offer sheets would be Rasmus Sandin, because Toronto's already got a lot of D.
Yep.
And keep in mind, you can now go up to $4.2 million, and it only costs you a second round pick for
Mm-hmm.
compensation. So Toronto, Rasmus Sandin, 4.2 million, they can't do that. So Anaheim, what did we just say about them? Well, when it comes to draft capital, they have 3
They have
second
it.
round picks in 2023. So they
Yep.
can afford to do the Sandin offer sheet. They can give 4.2 to Capo Caco. That would make the Rangers have to think about that, because
Yep.
they're close to the cap. They got 4.8 million in space, but 4.2 for Caco would probably throw a wrench into things in the future if he does bust. And we're not sure what we're going to get out of Caco yet. And why, like, Anaheim is in such a good position if they want to end the Dallas Stars career. And that's the thing. GMs just don't do this. They don't like to throw each other under the bus. They don't like to make things hard. But you could offer sheet a big offer sheet on Jake Ottinger, and Dallas is going to sit there and go, we're going to lose the guy that was our best player in the playoffs. And if they don't match, then what do they have in net? But if they do match, they still have Jason Robertson to sign. And you said Dallas, they might have the fourth most cap space in the league, but they're only sitting at what, 11.4?
Yeah.
Well, we're talking Ottinger and Robertson. Both of those guys could be considered franchise players going forward.
Yeah.
So you could double offer sheet Dallas, like consecutive offer sheets on those players, and you're going to get one guaranteed because of the money that you would be throwing around at guys like those two. And the only team that can do that in the league really is the Anaheim Ducks. And boy, you're going to trade Gibson anyway for assets, but Ottinger's a number one goalie. So that actually works. But also Jason Robertson and Trevor Zegras for years and years in their prime. So why don't they do that? That's a good question to me, because they are in a great position to do it.
I mean, we ask this question every year. Why doesn't teams use the offer sheet more? And you mentioned it, like GMs don't like to throw each other under the bus, and it sucks that they don't do this. I'm sure that these are things that get talked about and that they think of. Plus too, there's always the idea, we've heard this before, that a player might decline it, the offer sheet. Who knows? Maybe there's offer sheets that go around every year and players just say no. We don't know that. Now, I wouldn't say it would happen all the time every year, but we saw Mitch Marner. We heard Mitch Marner when he was in RFAs. He declined an offer sheet from, I think, Columbus.
It's from Columbus, yeah.
Yeah. So those are still possibilities, and it's always like it's always the things that we don't hear about that I think are the most interesting.
Yeah, but hey, I am very excited to see what Anaheim plans to do here, because they have the world is their oyster right now. They can pretty much pick whoever they want that teams are offering up money wise. So let's see who that is, because they need it.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick before we go to a break, tonight's show sponsored by John and Mary's Dinosaur Barbecue, as it always is. We'll have a Dinosaur Barbecue ad coming on in a little bit. With offer sheets, I want to clear something really quick. When you submit an offer sheet and let's say the team decides not to match it, you have to trade your own pick to it. So if you mentioned like 4.2 million being just a second round pick, that means Anaheim has to give their own second round pick, even though they have 3 of them. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. It has to be their own second round pick, which they do have.
Which they have, yeah. And that makes it a lot. You have to know that too with teams who, when they consider offer sheets, they have to know, okay, we don't have our pick for this, so we can't do this. That might be another reason why teams don't do offer sheets, because they don't have their own pick to do it with.
Yeah, it happens all the time. But in Anaheim's case, they have all their picks and more.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the Sabres too as a team that could do it as well, especially if they do decide to move a contract out like in a year or something. Because I mean, they have their first, they have their second next year. They don't have their third, but that's it, really. So like if they decide that they're going to offer a sheet like Jason Robertson and he takes 4.2, whatever the upper limit is for just trading a second round pick is, if they decide to go that route, then. And Dallas is in a tough spot, because now it's like, okay, if we take that, how much are we going to have to re-sign Jake Ottinger? Then, the Sabres are in a really good spot because they have their second round pick to use. And then they still have Philly and Vegas' second round pick if they get Jason Robertson for a second, essentially. Also,
my wink is Jason Robertson, born in California.
Yeah. Interesting. That makes me wonder if Anaheim would try to trade for his brother Nick in Toronto.
I mean, hey, anything's possible. In the Ducks, they could use some wingers. They really do. That's the one thing I think they need.
Yeah, I can. All right, we'll take a quick break and hear from our friends at Dinosaur Barbecue. Back at it with the Ranting Ron Show, Ranting Cast. Frank Arcuri, Brennan Klak is here. Now, we're talking a lot about free agency, a lot about what teams could be doing, what maybe they should be doing. We have a question. Frank and Brendan, do you think the Sabres trade or get rid of Andres Bjork? I think at most they waive him. I don't think he gets traded at any point, just because they still need the money right now just to keep themselves above the cap floor. I see Bjork as the 13th forward right now. Unless the team adds another forward, then maybe he's the 14th at this point. I don't really see much value in Bjork, but I assume, Brendan, you think the same way.
I do. I think Anders Bjork has always been a guy that I think you were hoping for more from, and it doesn't quite materialize. And $1.6 million, that is a little rich for a guy like that in this market when you're seeing those minimum deals start coming into free agency.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that he's a guy where he goes into training camp, you hope for the best, and if they have to waive him, they waive him then. But I don't imagine that his value is too high at this point.
I don't think so either. So that's the question. That was the question we got so far. Now, the big thing that happened over the weekend, Matthew Tkachuk traded to Florida for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, prospect Cole Schwinn, and a potential first-round pick that could be 3 or 4 years away, essentially. Brendan, what was the reaction when you saw this?
Well, it's actually funny. I was in a Walmart, and I just got a text from someone that's in, like, they're in the inn that I know, and they said, "All right, Tkachuk's going to Florida," and I had been thinking, okay, because like I had tweeted out a list earlier this week that got a lot of traction. It wasn't my list. It was a list from the great reporters Jeremy Rutherford and Haley Salvian from The Athletic. And they had kind of put in the middle of their article that Tkachuk had a list of teams that he wanted to go to. And that list was later denied by Eric Francis, but it kind of seemed to me like it was actually a denial by the Flames organization, and they would want as many teams in this as possible. And we heard later the Devils, the Canes, there were teams on that list that really tried to get in on this. But a lot of tax-free teams were in there: Vegas, Florida, Nashville. We had obviously St. Louis, which is where his family is currently residing. And I just thought, okay, Florida, for them to be on this list, who can they trade? Like, who would they have available? Like Sam Reinhart? Well, his value's only been as high because he's in Florida, arguably. And I'm not sure Sam Reinhart is the guy that would be a core like piece that they'd want back. What about, like, obviously Aaron Ekblad's not moving. And then I looked and I thought, you know what? Jonathan Huberdeau had a rough playoff. Would they move him? I just couldn't believe it, right? And then this trade goes down, but the fact that I thought about it earlier made it a little more palatable. But I couldn't believe that they also put Mackenzie Weegar in it, because I had heard that Mackenzie Weegar wasn't wanting to re-sign in Florida, that talks had stalled, but he's kind of a throw-in, and maybe one of the best throw-ins ever in a trade. Like, he's a guy that you didn't feel like they had to put in, but here he is. And that's probably where I was so surprised, is Huberdeau and Weegar and a first round pick. That was really the stunner, was the multiple pieces that weren't necessarily futures, but win now type of pieces.
So then, now that the dust is settled and we've had a couple days to process everything, what do you think of it from Florida's end and Calgary's end?
Well, it's funny. I already saw so many tweets that were just saying Calgary destroyed in this trade. They won it hands down. And I thought, it's almost impossible to evaluate this trade today, because there is a lot of variables that are still to come. And I kind of made a tweet where I said, here's me trying to cover all the bases, and I'll try to cover all the bases here as well. If the Calgary Flames re-sign Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar to decent term deals, I think you can say they won the trade, because Tkachuk for Huberdeau is already pretty even. I think going forward, Huberdeau is a little bit older, so he might have a little bit of a decline quicker. But I mean, hey, like, these are two all-star 100-point caliber players. So is the difference between Tkachuk and Huberdeau Weegar and a first? No,
No.
So if they were to keep Uyghur and Huberdeau, and Calgary hands down wins this trade because Florida would have lost more pieces than they really should have shipped out. If Calgary only re-signs Huberdeau, still a pretty good trade. Tkachuk was on his way out anyway, and now Huberdeau is your core piece to replace him. So in that case, even if Uyghur leaves, you still did really well, Brad Treliving. If they both leave, then I really don't like it for them. If they both, Huberdeau and Uyghur both to leave in a year, then you really should have pursued assets for Tkachuk that you were going to keep. And if it ends up just being Tkachuk for a first and 1 year of these guys, then that's going to be a really rough look on Calgary because Florida will still have Tkachuk for 7 years in his prime with Alex Barkov. And it's going to not age very well at all. If they only re-sign Uyghur, it's still Florida probably winning the deal, but it's not horrible for Calgary. I think Uyghur's their best defenseman now. I always kind of looked at Calgary's D and I thought, okay, Hanifin, good, but not elite. And then Chris Tanev, very good defensively, doesn't have an offensive game really. Rasmus Anderson, good, not elite. Uyghur's got the most potential to be somewhat elite. I'm not saying he will get there. I think the foot speed is a problem for him a little bit, but he has the most elite numbers out of any of those guys in the Flames blue line. Like Uyghur's analytics have been great forever. And not necessarily just with Ekblad. When Ekblad went down to injury, Uyghur was almost a point per game D-man for them. Not this season, but the year before. So
he manned the first pairing with Forsling, and they were one of the best D pairings.
Uyghur's an incredibly underrated player that because of his lack of speed, he is prone to that occasional one really big blunder. And people don't watch Florida enough sometimes where they see that one blunder and they go, he sucks. And that's what happened in the playoffs. In the playoffs, he had that one blunder against Tampa Bay, and people that hadn't watched Florida for most of the season, he just sucks because they saw that for the first time, and that's it. But Uyghur is 95% of the time a very good puck-moving guy with a surprising physical edge, and he's going to fit really well with Daryl Sutter. So if they just kept him, it's not the end of the world. Uyghur in a first for Tkachuk is a Florida win, but it's not the end of the world. This is a trade that could go in many different ways for Calgary. I think for Florida, even if they lose the deal, they don't really lose the deal.
They still do really well in this.
Yeah. You kept Tkachuk for 8 years on a value deal. 9.5 is a value deal for considering what other guys were getting. We had Marner and Matthews, Panarin, Eichel, all these other guys going for over 10. You locked in Tkachuk for under 10, and he's the only player. He's probably, with Marchand, one of two guys in the league that can get 90 points and also be an agitator, right? It's a very rare trait and quality of skill and combo of skill. So they have this guy now for 8 years. They don't really lose. They might lose in value, but they're extremely happy because they got their guy. And I think Tkachuk's going to be great for them for a long time. So like Florida's kind of safe in this to me, whereas Calgary, it could be an overwhelming win or a huge loss, depending on those two guys resigning.
So, and you mentioned it earlier, I think if Calgary is going to try to re-sign both Uyghur and Huberdeau, the potential term has to be right for them for it to be a big win for them, because, Huberdeau is going to be 30 next offseason. Uyghur is going to be 29. Now, we still think Uyghur's really good right now, but if you resign him to an 8-year deal, that's going to be a contract. And even Huberdeau, the same thing. That's going to be a contract where halfway through it's going to look really bad. And realistically, unless they somehow take a step forward and have another playoff run, it's not going to be Brad Treliving trying to trade these contracts away to start a rebuild for Calgary. I mean, this to me feels like Treliving's last stand in a way.
Oh, 100%. Like Brad Treliving has to make this trade. He has no choice.
He
has to. If he doesn't make this trade, if he does go out and he gets all these future assets for Tkachuk, it might help the Flames future-wise in the long run. But ultimately, the GM is Brad Treliving, and I think he would like to keep his job. So if he wants to keep his job, they have to keep trying to win. Because if you're going to rebuild, a lot of teams like to then say, let's get a new voice in here. Let's get somebody else in here to oversee this transition. He knows that. So this is his way of going, we're still in it. We have prime players here. I can get 100-point player in here. We're not done. I'm not done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he has no choice in making this trade. If Huberdeau and Weegar walk away, like, and he's gone, he'll go, well, hey, I tried though. I could have just sat
Yeah,
there and
he will.
waved a white flag and said I tried. So I don't blame Brad for making that trade at all. And I do think it's fair to say it's his last stand. And also, I've seen a lot of people kicking around like, oh, well, Calgary's just going to move Huberdeau and Weegar anyway for assets at the deadline. No,
They're
they're
not going to
not.
get as much.
Well, they'll get stuff, but not as much. And they're not going to do that if they're in a playoff spot. Like,
Oh yeah.
why would they trade their best player at that point, being Huberdeau, if
Yep.
they're third in the division in the Pacific? Like, Brad's going to want to see if they can win the cup with this new core of guys. And Daryl Sutter, he's the one of the only coaches in the league that can say, I've won a cup as an 8th seed. So,
And not only that, like with the Pacific Division the way it is, I mean, Calgary can definitely make the playoffs still. That division's still weak. You probably expect still Vegas to go back to being a really good team next season, and Edmonton, I mean, we'll see what happens. With Jack Campbell now as the starter, who knows? They could. I think they're still a high potential team, and then LA looks like a high potential team as well, getting Kevin Fiala, and so I don't know. Like, it's really. I mean, we've never seen a trade like this before, so it's really hard to process it. It's really hard to kind of look back, years ago and think, what's a comparable for this kind of trade? Like, what happened when this team got these guys, and then what happened when this team got this guy? We've never really seen a trade like this, so it's hard to. I think this is it's hard to see who really comes out a winner until, like, I mean, I hate to say it, until like 4 years from now. That's when we'll know. Because really, or we might know next year too. It's going to be somewhere in that window. If Calgary re-signs Huberdeau and Weegar to 8-year deals, it might be a win for Calgary in the short term, for the next 2 or 3 years. But after that, I don't think so. Because then you're signing Huberdeau till he's 38, and you're signing Weegar till he's 37. And with Huberdeau being as poor defensively as he is, he's gonna fall off. He's gonna fall off a lot quicker than he rose. I mean, at the very least, they're still gonna have Huberdeau while he's still in his prime and being one of the best playmakers, one of the best pure passers in the league. But you still got those defensive deficiencies that you got to worry about that Matthew Tkachuk made up a lot of on that first line. I mean, Elias Lindholm is a really good defensive forward already, and he was in the Selke conversation for a reason. But Huberdeau, to me, just feels like a replacement for Johnny Gaudreau, not a replacement for Matthew Tkachuk. And I think that's going to hurt Calgary a lot.
it might. I guess the counter argument to that, and I'm not saying you're wrong, because I think Jonathan Huberdeau defensively has shortcomings, and that's definitely something where if you look into the analytics, like I used to think, like Huberdeau, especially this last season, he went up offensively and sacrificed some defense to do it. A lot of the Florida team did so, actually, and in the playoffs, it just didn't really materialize that way.
It got them exposed.
It got them exposed, and I look at a guy like Jonathan Huberdeau though, and I think, all right, you're in a new area. You're playing Canada. Daryl Sutter did get the best out of Johnny Gaudreau. Mm-hmm. And whether or not Johnny Gaudreau liked being coached by Daryl Sutter, I mean, this is a coach that, hey, how's Johnny Gaudreau for his 1,000th game? Well, he better be better than his 999th game. Like, Daryl Sutter's not playing favorites ever. He's always a guy that can be brash and harsh on players to try to get the best out of them. But Jonathan Huberdeau might have his best defensive year ever because he's being coached by a guy that basically says you're not doing anything else but playing a two-way game. Like, Daryl Sutter's not going to sit there and let you play a one-way game. You'll sit for a little bit, or you'll have a loss of power play time. And it's hard to believe they're going to do that to a guy like Huberdeau. But at the same time, like, Daryl Sutter's an old school guy. So I think he's going to definitely instill that system into Huberdeau. He might have defensive metrics that look actually pretty good, and things might change for him. But yeah, going forward, he is older than Tkachuk. That's a factor, especially if you're going to give him a big extension, a big contract. And we haven't seen Huberdeau in the playoffs yet be a driver. And Matt Tkachuk, well, we haven't seen him be a great driver in the playoffs, but he's got all those years to still do it. So it's going to be a trade that we definitely take a while to evaluate. We might start seeing signs of what we can say about it by the trade deadline. Is Calgary in the playoff mix? Are they not in the playoff mix? Are they selling off Huberdeau and Weegar? Are they keeping them? Do they have contracts yet? What are they saying in the media? If you're a Flames fan, you must be somewhat happy to see Huberdeau and Weegar the other day, I think it was actually yesterday, come out and say, we are willing to sign long-term here. It's better than what Pierre-Luc Dubois' conference gave the Winnipeg Jets fans. It's better than a lot of other conferences that have a canned answer, and we'll see. No, they said, we're willing to look and we're willing to potentially do it. That gives you a little bit of hope that at least they're considering that. And I think at least in Weegar's case, and probably in Huberdeau's too, if they lose speed, I don't know how much of a problem that actually will be. Like, Weegar's already not very fast, so his game is with his brain. Huberdeau, great playmaker. Once again, more of a brain than a speed thing. So maybe their contracts won't be too bad when they age, but we'll find out. But I guess we'll have to see if they sign, those big long-term deals and whatnot. And if they win, if they're first in the division this year and Huberdeau has 100+ points and Weegar's a 50-point D-man and ends up being the number one, it's going to be hard to justify letting them go for anything or re-signing them short-term. Like, Flames fans are going to love them right away if they come out and become key core players.
Yeah, I think it'll be tough for Calgary though, especially if they go into the season. If they get to like January next year and neither have a new contract, even though now they're saying that they're open to a new deal, you start to worry no matter where they are in the standings, because then if you're Flames fan, you're just asking, I mean, we might make the playoffs this year, we might have a run, but unless we win the cup, is it even going to be worth it at that point? Are we? And if they're not getting new deals by next July 1st and both of them walk, if they win the cup, who cares? Who cares? You won the cup, doesn't matter. Congratulations. But if they don't anything less than that, they have to get new contracts in before, like, as soon as possible, really, for there to be any justification.
If you're a Flames fan and Huberdeau and Weegar just walk and you don't win anything, you're going to probably lament that you didn't get those futures for Tkachuk on the basis that this was the year to tank. Like, if you look around the draft class, it's like, okay, Bedard is looking like and things can change. We were saying Shane Wright was going to be a franchise possible player, and now he went 4th overall, and now people don't know.
Oh.
I still think he's good.
He still can. There's
doubt, right? But from what we're seeing, I still believe in Shane Wright. We had him ranked 1 on our list. My buddy Matt Moswich and I, our draft list, we still said Shane Wright was number 1. Mm-hmm. But we're talking Connor Bedard. We're talking Matvei Mishkov. We're talking Adam Fantilli, and then a bunch of other top tier prospects right behind them. Like, those 3 I just mentioned are all being considered as potential franchise guys right now. And even I've seen people say, well, Chicago, they're going for Bedard. I think Chicago would love Adam Fantilli. I'm not saying they'd take him over Bedard, but I think they don't mind being 3rd overall in the draft next year and not 1st. Like,
isn't he from the area?
That's right. Yeah. So they would definitely not mind Adam Fantilli, who I think is an incredible player as well. So this was the draft to tank. So Arizona knows that. And that's why it'll be interesting to watch, if Huberdeau and Weegar end up bailing, then Calgary will be like, the fans will be PO'd that they didn't just tank this year.
I guess I can't really see Calgary tanking anyway, just because of the moves they've made over the last couple of years. So I can see, I definitely get a much bigger perspective on why they would still try to go for win now players to do it. I mean, they still have Markstrom signed for another 4 years. They still have Anderson signed for another 4 years. They just signed Blake Coleman last summer to a 6-year deal. They traded for Tyler Toffoli, who's got 2 years left. So I could see why, if they don't make these moves, then you're looking and thinking, just get futures then for Gaudreau and Tkachuk at that point, because you're not making the playoffs anytime soon. But they're still trying to win now and still trying to make the playoffs. So yeah, I definitely see I still see the logic. I'm not sure if it helps them in the long run. Unless, like I said, unless they win this year. It's really because realistically for Calgary, it's win or bust. That's it. No offense or buts about it. Win or bust. They still have to re-sign Mangiapane and Shillington too. So they have to win this year, or else it might all be blown up at this point.
I have a theory about that too, actually. I look at Calgary and I love Andrew Mangiapane. I think he's a great player. And
I love Shillington as well.
I like Shillington too, but I do wonder, they get Uyghur. You've got Uyghur, you have Tanev, you have Anderson Hanifin. You just gave Nikita Zadorov a lot of money.
Yep.
I could see them
as well.
Though that's the thing. They have Valimaki as well, and they could also bring back Michael Stone, which they normally do. And he had a pretty good little cup of coffee last year when he played.
Mm-hmm.
I could see a scenario where they go, all right, we still need to kind of get the production we lost out of Johnny Gaudreau because we essentially replaced Huberdeau and Tkachuk, and Huberdeau is more of a Gaudreau type.
Yep.
But we still need some forward offense coming in, and maybe they trade Shillington. They have a lot of D-men already, and Shillington for a forward would be an interesting swap. So I do wonder if that's a possibility for them yet. And maybe it's another forward RFA where it's RFA for RFA and another team gets Shillington. And that would happen pretty quick because the arbitration cases are coming up. So I wonder if that's something we see.
That's interesting too, and I can definitely see that. Yeah, you're right. I'm looking at Calgary's cap friendly, and I'm just thinking they may have to move a defenseman just based off of the numbers that they have. I mean, realistically, they have 7 NHL defensemen. They don't need 7 NHL defensemen. I mean, they could use 7 NHL defensemen, yes, but like Valimaki's still a guy that they should be playing most nights, and so is Shillington. And then, they just gave Zadorov a contract for the bottom 6, and their top 4 looks pretty set if Shillington's not included, in Hanifin, Anderson, Tanev, and Uyghur. I mean, they could just play Uyghur on the left side, not a big deal. I definitely see that as an option. You just wonder, well, then who's a team that needs another defenseman then that has RFAs that they maybe having trouble signing? That's the question you got to ask.
A lot of teams would probably like Oliver Shillington based on how he played last year. I mean, he was excellent, and D-men are always a priority for many teams. So I would be looking around at okay, so who are the RFAs that are left? Just off the top of my head, I don't know if I see too many forward fits. I mean, there is one that won't be a fit because of the rivalry, and that would be Jesse Puljujarvi, who the Oilers would need to add in order for that trade to occur.
Oh yeah.
So that's not happening. The Oilers also, it is funny though, because the Oilers need a left-hand defenseman. That's one of the things that Brett Kulak is a great defenseman in my opinion, but he's never really played a full-time top 4 role. He's played for stretches, so they could use another guy, but it's not going to be Shillington for Puljujarvi. I would bet very good money on that. But if I look at the other RFAs around the league and I kind of, decipher what could work for them, this Capo Caco makes some sense. Well,
I was just thinking of that.
He would be a future asset as well. So he's a guy that could end up becoming something for them, but also, could be something right away just for the short term. And at the same time, in terms of the Rangers, their D is probably something that I think they should look into still touching up on. Like the Rangers defense is something that can be an adventure depending on the night, and they get helped out by how good Shesterkin is. But I'm looking at the Rangers on Cap Friendly right now, and I see 5 D-men. Now, I imagine that's because they're not including Zach Jones or Niels Lundqvist, and either guy will probably end up on the roster as of right now. Maybe even Libor Hayek, but Libor Hayek is not very good. Zachary Jones is really young. Niels Lundqvist really struggled in his time with New York. His metrics didn't look so hot. And on their actual roster, I mean, they only have two left-handy showing here. They have Condre Miller and Ryan Lindgren. So could they use a guy like Shillington?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, they could. They really could use a guy like Shillington. So is Shillington for Kakko something that would have interest
I
for
don't.
both teams? Yes.
We had a Rangers guy on last week, and he was mentioning how he thinks the Rangers are going to really try to push Lafreniere and Kakko. They're going to re-sign Kakko and then push him more into a top six role to kind of try to build that up as well. So I don't know if they would consider that, but I mean it's certainly there, especially if maybe they have second thoughts on Kakko. Here, let me throw this one out there for you. Carolina, Shillington for Natchez.
Carolina's always interested in D.
That's why I'm
They
thinking
really
that.
value D. So
Because like they could, I mean, if you look at the lefty righty aspect of it, they could use a third lefty. They really only have two in Slavin and Shea. So you add Shillington to that. I mean, if their decor is Slavin, Burns, Shea, Pesci, Shillington, Bear / Dylan Copeland, like you can get behind that.
Yeah, I guess the one variable there, just
Money.
looking at Cap Friendly, well, also, so right now he's showing on long-term injured reserve, but if you listen to Don Waddell, Jay Gardner is ready to return. I don't know what Jay Gardner's playability will be like. However, at $4 million, I imagine he'll get a shot at the roster if he's healthy and he's still there. Jay Gardner is also an option potentially to be dealt with a draft pick to the Anaheim Ducks because Gardner used to be an Anaheim Duck. So
drafted by them, yeah.
I could see that potentially down the road, but at the same time, for now he's there. They also just signed William Lagesson to a two-way deal.
Mm-hmm.
Lagesson's actually pretty decent number 7 type of defenseman. He was pretty good at Edmonton this season and got quite underrated this year. I thought he made a lot of strides, but Montreal wasn't as hot for him. I mean, the team was at that point dead in the water and just under the Martin St. Louis experiment and seeing upticks with some players, but he was kind of an afterthought. So could they use Shillington? I think they could. I think Natchez is exactly the type of guy that would be great for a team like Calgary. It's possible. There are some roadblocks in Carolina's way for doing that, but I also think that is a name that I could see. That's not a bad name to throw out there. Natchez would be a very interesting Calgary Flame, and those two teams have trade history, right?
Yeah, with Hannafin and Dougie Hamilton. Yeah. I'm going to throw one more name out there. I don't know who would go to Calgary in this, but I think this team would be very interesting because they have been rumored to be looking for another defenseman, and they have a defenseman that they don't seem to be as high on who's very young. Ottawa.
Ottawa needs a D-man, in my opinion, to make the playoffs. And they've done some great work this offseason. Alex DeBrincat was a steal. They didn't have to move a player out for that. Mm-hmm. I thought getting Claude Giroux was excellent. That was a great signing. No, keep in mind.
Real quick though, I'm suspect about Talbot, but if you get similar production out of Anton Forsberg as you did last year, it might make up for it.
I mean, here's the thing with Cam Talbot. I kind of thought and felt that he got screwed over in Minnesota. I understood why he was upset. He went 13 or I think it was 16-0-2 to end the season. And then Fleury started game 1. So he felt pretty like I deserved to start game 1. And then he got thrown into game 6. Right. So
yeah,
I think as a tandem, I do like it. I'm just letting you know, my laptop is on the dying.
We're about to end the show. So
I'll say one thing about Ottawa. They need a D-man at the playoffs, and I'm a little bit worried about Drake Batherson and Alex Formanson's availability. They are potentially in the suspension talk for the World Junior Gala incident.
Yeah.
They have not said anything yet. Their agents have not said anything yet. You don't want to accuse anybody. You never know.
No,
but
we don't.
At the moment, they are suspect.
Yeah. Definitely. So, I mean, like, if they feel like they have to move one of them out, especially because Formanton still needs a contract, that might be a way to do it, especially if they really don't feel that high on Eric Bransham. He's that strut defenseman that I was talking about who they don't really seem high on. Plus, they got Sanderson coming in next season, too. So, yeah, there's options, I think. And we'll know in the next couple of years, in the next year or two, if how Calgary really did in this trade. Brendan, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. Tell the people right before your laptop dies where they can find you.
NHL update, all lowercase on Twitter. Find me there for all your NHL transactions. Thanks for having me on, Frank.
Absolutely, Brennan. We'll see you we'll see you later. You have a good one, and guys, we'll see you next time on the Ranting Cast. Who knows when the next time we're doing a show is? We got Bill's training camp just starting, so we'll be talking that. Probably during some parts of August, and then after training camp starts and the season starts, we got Sabres training camp. That means hockey's back as well, so we'll be having a lot of fun with that. Brendan, you have a great night, and we'll see you all.